Oh, I'm very happy to lecture today for many reasons. One is that Bertil is an old friend. We've known each other for 30 years. He's one of the first Swedish economists, labor economists that I've ever met. And of course, he's applied our model, all right? Secondly, the university has a long history. As the rector, or in English they translate as that as Vice-Chancellor, pointed out that the university's origins go back to before Columbus discovered America. However, I did not point out to him, given my Scandinavian roots, that it was not before Leif Erikson discovered America. All right, so let's get on with the topic today. I start with this quote, which obviously predates our work. Ordinarily, the other day I didn't explain it either. I intended to explain what marginal efficiency of capital meant, but I'm assuming we have enough economics students here that you've come across that term. The point I want to emphasize was Keynes's point that fluctuations in expectations were associated with, and in fact, a principal cause of trade cycle fluctuations. I'm going to come back to that point in the context of the discussion today. What I intend to do today, I guess I've got a slide here, is give a brief introduction and then introduce, if you like, the history of the development of the principal concepts that underlies what has become known as the Diamond-Mortensen-Pissarides model, and then use that structure to, at the end, to make a few observations about how to use the model and interpret or provide some interpretation of recent events, particularly in the United States. And that's the structure of what I'll say today. Start out with what are search frictions? What role do they play in the operation of markets? The example I talked about the other day was was a personal example about buying an apartment, which my wife and I have been involved in the last, we're involved in about 2 years ago. We purchased the apartment a year ago, and we're now looking forward to move in within within a month or so. There are, of course, other examples. Labor market's an obvious one, but I might just bring out, since we have a fairly young audience here today, that many students in the university are engaged in a search and matching process, looking for a potential life partner. Now, the only difference between that activity, the search and matching activity that is engaged in by young people and unemployed workers, there's obviously a difference, and that's that in one case it's more pleasurable than the other. But nevertheless, there are a not so ignore the first row. I should, okay. Actually, Nobu Kiyotaki told the following story. He said, what does looking for a job and looking for a mate have in common? And they both involve friction. Interpret that as you like. All right, anyway, the problem that frictions and the necessity to gather information presents at the individual or at the agent level is that it, of course, takes time. Because it takes time, of course, you're looking for a good match, one that'll last a relatively long time. You don't want to go through the process again if avoidable, although that of course happens for a variety of reasons. So, the third sort of aspect is you can't look at all possibilities. There's just too many possibilities to consider, and what does that imply? Well, first of all, it's an investment decision. You're investing time and resources now for future benefits. That implies that expectations about future benefits are going to be important. Secondly, the fact that you can't survey all the possibilities implies that you may have to, at some point in time, make a decision that the option that's available is at least as good as the expected future possibility. So an acceptable house, partner, or job, missing B there, is one that offers an expected stream of future benefits that has a value in excess of the option to search for an even better one. So this is the spot where expectations enters into the analysis and why it's important. From the viewpoint of a sort of classical supply and demand model that we're used to using as first approach to thinking about markets, that's obviously inadequate. In fact, unemployment really doesn't even exist because, of course, by definition, in equilibrium at least, the wage is such that the number of jobs available is just equal to the number of people who want those jobs at the prevailing wage. So the notion is not even there. And another sort of unrealistic aspect is that there's only, by definition, one wage. And in the real world, that's not true. Different folk, different strokes receive different wages, even if they are identical. And one of the reasons for that is, of course, this issue of having to decide on what's acceptable before one finds necessarily the best possibility. And even if jobs are identical, workers may accept a wage that's less than the highest available, simply because they don't know or a job paying that wage isn't available, or they haven't found one. So in that approach, which was also dominated Keynesian thinking, unemployment must arise only when the wage is too high. That is, it's above the level that equates supply and demand. But that view has its other limitations as well. Once you actually go out and look at, observe what unemployed workers are doing, you realize that workers are spending a relatively short time looking for a job, and then once they find the job, a relatively longer time employed, and those facts are simply reflecting the reality that there are large flows of workers continuously being hired, and then large flows as well of separations on the other side. That these flows are an important part of what's going on in the labor market. And then you need a theory that incorporates issues like how long does it take to find a job, how long do jobs last, and at least classical spot market for labor model doesn't work because that model really sort of assumes that every morning you get up and go to some central hiring hall and there's an auction that determines the wage for the day and the allocation of workers to the available jobs during that day. And then tomorrow's just like today, although the situation may be a little bit different, but the process is the same. That's not the way the labor market works. So the way the labor market works does involve large flows of workers continuously moving into employment and moving out of unemployment. And when you take that view, then where is unemployment going to be? Well, again, unemployment is one way to define an equilibrium here is that unemployment is the level of a stock of the unemployed workers that balances flows in and out of that state. I'm going to call that the flow balance equation. It's a differential equation that we would call, within the profession, we call it the law of motion for the state variable, either employment or unemployment, depending upon which way you want to look at it. In a two-state model, you can extend the model, of course, to involve many states, and I think Peter's going to talk about that. But in a two-state model, one reflects the other. And I sometimes tell my students it's a bathtub model. Think of it as a bathtub. The level of employment of an unemployment is the level in the tub. The flow in is the water rate at which it's flowing in, and the flow out is, of course, what's going out the drain. All right. Now here's a picture of that from the employment side. The last 10 years in the United States. On the left, flows are measured on the left. The sort of spiky black line, I think, is the flow in to employment, the flow of new hires. Each of these points is a month during the period December 2000 to somewhere, let me look over here, I guess the ending point here is about a year ago, all right? And just to look at the numbers, these are in thousands, so this is 5.5 million people at the beginning, and then it got almost back up, the higher flow, back up to 5.5 million a month after the recession. This is the recession, of course, of 2001, and this is the Great Recession over here. That's the gray area, the NBR definition of or designation of recessions. And then the associated stock level of the stock is given by the smooth curve. Now, the law of motion dictates as a definition that the change in the level is equal, the monthly change in the level is equal to the net difference between the higher flow and the separation flow. So we see from the picture, well, all right, let me go on. 5.5 million, say, at the peak periods in this 10-year period. But even now, or at the end, a year ago, and it hasn't changed much, the higher, there were 4 million people a month hired. All right. The level of employment's measured on the right vertical scale. All right. Look at the figures there. I mean, roughly, if we do a rough calculation, there's 150 million people in the labor force. Somewhat less than 10% of those are unemployed, or in other words, around 15 million. Even 4 million a month relative to 50 million unemployed means that if there weren't any outflow, you could quickly hire all the unemployed workers. So the point of the flows diagram is to show that in spite of the rhetoric, there are no jobs available. There are many people finding jobs no matter where we are in the cycle. What the issue is the fluctuation in those flows over the cycle. And you'll note that although the NBR doesn't use this metric directly, in these two periods of recession, these two recessions, what characterize them is the fact that separation flow exceeds the higher flow. So that there are periods in which the level of employment's falling, all right, net. That's true, both of them. And that's really, in the labor market, what the recession, in fact, is. It's a period in which employment's falling when hires do not offset the outflow. And the outflow is the difference, of course, between, so the outflow is both the sum of what we might call quits and layoffs. And roughly, the separations are more or less equally divided on average between the two. Now, the reason that the separation flow fluctuates in a very similar way, to the higher flow, is that they have a very large common component. That 50% of separations that are quits, most of those are quitting to take another job. So they don't go into the unemployment pool. They stay employed without an intervening period of unemployment. And the flow, the quit flow, is very pro-cyclic. Quits are very high during good times when it's easy to find a job, perfectly consistent with the kind of model we're talking about. And the voluntary quit flow is very low when it's hard to find a job. So that's why they move so much together. They don't move, of course, perfectly together. It's precisely the net difference that's important for the level. All right, that's flows. Now, at this stage, just a little sort of history of development of the ideas that became the Diamond Mortensen festivities model. I have to start with my own paper, of course, but there's a reason for that, because this flows approach that I just gave you became a focal point of analysis among people who dealt with sort of macro labor questions in the late 60s. And a number of the people that were working on that issue were brought together by Professor Phelps, who won the Nobel Prize recently. And he played a particular role in my personal case because, in a sense, he was my discoverer. When I wrote this paper called The Theory of Wage and Employment Dynamics, which was my first attempt to really theoretically bring together the discussion that had been going on by people like Charlie Holt and Alston Alchin, and then Phelps himself, concerning the sort of dynamic view of the labor market. I was, along with other people, including, as I said, Phelps himself, our contributions were collected by Ned into what became known as the Phelps volume. So I published, that was exactly 40 years ago. That was my first paper, and started my research career, not only in this area, but in terms of all the work. At about the same time, in fact, the same time, Peter Diamond was thinking about similar issues, although he was more interested in how prices were formed, how were prices created, how were determined in a world with friction, because with friction, we have to throw away the fiction of the auctioneer, that fiction, not friction, fiction of the auctioneer, because precisely the existence of friction says that the two sides of the market are not brought together in a setting that we can think about as an auctioneer's operated, where prices are set by an auctioneer. So instead, he supposed that in a product market that output prices in this particular case were set by producers or sellers of the good, and that buyers, the consumers, simply had the option of either purchasing at those prices or not. And he discovered in an environment, at least, in which workers search for prices by sampling from known distribution, one by one, sequentially. So any price they see, they have to respond to sequentially. They can't gather them together. In that particular situation, that the outcome, although it was one price, was the monopoly price, not the competitive price. In other words, that the price setter took all the gains from trade in any particular, or at least at the margin, relative to the marginal buyer, received all the gains from trade. And that was a consequence of looking at this from a strategic point of view. The rationale is simple. If all others, if it's sequential and you're the buyer, you know that all prices are the same, then you'll buy, the first time you have an opportunity at the going price, all right? But if all the buyers are buying at the going price and the seller knows that the workers are not going to search for a second price, then when buyer and seller meet, the seller knows that he can get the reservation price of the buyer. All right, and that's the outcome of the game. Now you can relax the assumptions of this game and get different results. If all buyers know all the prices, you get the famous Bertrand outcome, that it is the Walrasian price. When you're somewhere in between those two, you can get distribution prices. Prices are different across different buyers, or if there's heterogeneity on the buyers or the seller's side, you can get a distribution of prices. But the main point is that the price in general will be different in the settings from the competitive price, and often higher in the product context. Later, these models developed sort of further. For example, I wrote a model, I used the structure later to talk about the other side of the of the flow equation that we're talking about, the separation side, in a paper in the Bell Journal, and in a related paper that Peter and Eric Maskin wrote. They used the model to ask the question about what were the aspects of labor contracts, what kind of labor contracts should be written in this environment. At the same time, about the same time at that point, Festivities came on the scene, and he was particularly interested in macro issues and how employment services operated. So he used the model to think about those problems. So these were kind of applications of early versions of the model. All of this sort of came together in terms of a analysis of macro labor considerations in a set of papers, two of mine in '82, two of Peter's in '82, and Chris in '85, and then a follow-up in '86, where the concepts of some important concepts were agreed on. One, in the model, although it started sort of, the search was viewed as one-sided, it clearly became obvious that employers recruited and searched for workers as well as workers searched for jobs, so that it was much more symmetric than the original model suggested. And in that symmetric world, it was more logical to think of there not being monopoly power, but if you like, bilateral monopoly power. And of course, the natural solution to a bilateral monopoly problem is some form of negotiation or bargaining. You notice '82 is a time when there was a lot of discussion about bargaining, although I personally wasn't all that aware about Rubinstein's research at that point, but certainly became aware quickly after. I was with a group at Northwestern of game theorists who were working on Nash bargaining and thinking about that, and from them I just applied the Nash bargaining concept, and I think Peter had some similar, I don't know, he can relate that, but that was we just accepted the Nash axioms in this particular case and applied that to the wage setting problem. The other important concept, of course, was the matching function, a way of really an aggregate representation of the outcome of search and recruiting activity on the two sides of the market. So the matching function, like a production function, is a market level, in this case, relationship between the rate at which workers and firms meet as a consequence of the dynamic of search, and viewed as its magnitude viewed as a function of the extent to which there are inputs into the matching process on the part of the workers and employers. And the simplest version, the notion of measuring inputs, is just to look at how many searching workers are there and how many vacant jobs are there. What are the volumes of workers on either side of the market? And that matching function, of course, the postulated matching function supposed that the meeting rate was an increasing function of both of these inputs. And also had some other properties like concavity. There was diminishing returns to each of the two inputs. And complementarity, an increase in one input would increase the marginal return in terms of the matching rate of the other. So the matching function had all, if you like, standard properties of an aggregate production function. There was some debate about whether it was constant returns or increasing returns, and Peter showed in a couple of papers over a couple of years that with increasing your returns, you got some very interesting phenomena that occurred. Self-fulfilling expectations would give you multiple equilibria, and in fact, self-generated cycles, and that those papers had a big impact on the whole. I can't even see it. 5 minutes? Well, we're not going to get very far today. I thought we, well, never. Then later, Chris and I endogenized the separation side of the model in the 94 paper. So that sort of does the history. Wrong way. The matching function and the balance equation, the flow balance equation, are represented in these pictures. The matching, in this particular way, the matching function, if there is homogeneity of degree 1, the rate at which workers find jobs or more accurately meet potential jobs, but you can't see that. You just look at how they find jobs. Versus the vacancy unemployment ratio is after appropriate filtering is represented in the left picture. This is from Scheimer's 2005 paper, while the implication of the flow balance equation, namely that vacancies and unemployment should be negatively associated, is verified on the right picture. These are respectively monthly on the left, quarterly observations over the period 51 to 2003 in the United States. That's, as I said, the technology. Now, if we add the economics, what we need here is one more concept, which was introduced by Chris in his 85 paper, and that's a sort of dynamic demand condition, which we call the free entry condition or the job creation condition, which simply is an investment equation. It says that the cost of creating a vacancy is equal to the expected future profit associated with that on the employer side. And then the other is, if you like, the supply side, which is the outcome of the bargaining problem, which says that the easier it is to find jobs, the more you have to pay workers. They have a threat of finding an alternative, and then given that threat, the employers are willing to pay them. And the equilibrium is of course, the vacancy unemployment rate and the wage promises pair that balances these two forces, if you like, and that's represented here. If you've been introduced to this topic by Chris's book, this is the chapter 1 model, essentially, in Chris's 1990 book, or the first chapter of the second edition in 2000, with the bargaining outcome or wage equation represented in red. Nice Christmas colors, I thought, and the job creation curve on in green. Now, this model has a particular attraction because there's a natural separation here. There are expectations involved, of course, in the bargaining, because the workers have to think about what the future wages will be. But where they primarily enter is determining the location of the job creation curve. The more optimistic employers are about the future, the further out that is, the more they're willing to pay for a given number of vacancies created per unemployed worker. So that's where expectations lie. So let's skip right away to the Great Recession. See, I'm really speeding this one up. What happens in about 2007? Well, in the U.S., housing prices start to fall. this was an expectation shock. All right? Everyone believed, or at least if you look at the newspapers, everyone believed that this would never happen. Housing prices never fall. They started to fall. They were. It wasn't dramatic at that particular point, but nevertheless, as a consequence, people sort of revised their expectations. And with that meant that households were now trying to compensate in their by spending less, particularly on durables. This fed through to employers, made them much more pessimistic about the future. Their response was to create fewer vacancies, and that's represented here by a shift down in the job creation curve, resulting in fewer vacancies for unemployed workers. Then things got worse during the financial crisis. Then we also got into a situation of restricted credit, small businesses, small employers. I had a student finish last year in his thesis documenting that one of the things that happens in recessions is, and in this particular recession, is that the lines of credit that most employers use, in fact, to finance their working capital, and a good part of their working capital is simply payroll, those lines of credit were suspended, all right? A line of credit is exactly that. It's access to credit on an ongoing basis. Once that happened, there were problems of financing not only new employees, but current employees. Layoffs result. There was a further reduction in optimism about the future. All right, are those predictions borne out? This is the famous beverage curve published in this year's Nobel Prize guide constructed, I'm sure, by some of the people that helped Bertel in the analysis here. And what it represents is vacancies on the horizontal, unemployment rate on the, I'm sorry, I said it wrong again. Vacancy rate on the horizontal, on the vertical, unemployment rate on the horizontal. Each point is a different quarter in the period, same period we looked at before, December 2000 to December 2009. And I want to let's start up here in the left corner, because what we see is a typical pattern in a normal recession that starts up here in 2000, and then the recession occurred in 2001 and continued for quite some time. The unemployment rate rises and vacancy unemployment ratio, think of the other picture, was falling. I'm arguing because of this expectation shock. Down here's 2007, sort of the depth of the recession, and then it starts to recover, and we come back up to December 2007. So this is a typical down-up picture. In the normal range of variation for the period after World War II, this is right. It really traces what's perfectly normal in a standard small recession. First down the beverage curve, the relationship's called the beverage curve, and then back up. Then in 2007, we start to get see the effects of among other things, falling house prices and consumption demand falling, and a slow movement again back down to roughly June 2008, which is right there. And then you know what happens after that. The financial crisis kicks in big time by September 2008 and throughout the rest of the year. So for the next year, all right, as I say, during the beginning of the Great Recession, we march right down the beverage curve, down into an area we haven't seen, all right, for a long time, but right down, down to June 2009. Then, since the last year or so, unemployment gets stuck down here. around 10% and 9.5 to 10%. Vacancies seem to go up and down. There's some issues about exactly what that means, and in fact, that's a source of considerable debate. But I'm going to not talk about that today. If someone wants to ask us questions about it, we have our views. All right. That wraps up what I was going to say today, but just to return to the original theme, at least up to the last year, I think you can explain what happened in the labor market is a reaction to what happened elsewhere in the economy, the financial, the changes in the portfolios induced by changes in house prices in at the level of the households, and then the response to that of the fact that we had some very fragile, it turned out, ways of financing investments in housing in the United States, and some of the European banks, of course, got involved in that as well, and so there was a propagation of much of what we're saying to Europe, and a not too dissimilar response in the labor markets in Europe. The differences in the responses of labor markets in Europe can be attributed in large measure to differences in institutions, and we feel that our model has something to say about those differences as well. All right, thank you.